Welcome, everyone. My name is Selma Meyerowitz, and I am a member of the UC Berkeley Class of 68. I would like to welcome everyone to the Class of 68's 10th Homecoming Lecture, co-sponsored by the Goldman School of Public Policy and featuring a panel discussion on populism and the Tea Party in American politics. The Class of 68 is very grateful to UC Berkeley's top-ranked Goldman School of Public Policy for its support of this homecoming lecture and for its support of the Center on Civility and Democratic Engagement, founded by the Class of 68 and established at the Goldman School. Since the class's 35th reunion in 2003, members of the Class of 68 have been gathering quarterly on campus on Saturday mornings. A key objective of our early quarterly gatherings was to plan for our 40th reunion gift, which included funding to establish the Center on Civility and Democratic Engagement in 2008. Our ongoing objective is to hold discussions with Cal faculty, students, and staff from different departments and different programs on campus, as well as at the UC Center in Washington, D.C. We're now beginning to plan for our 45th reunion during Homecoming 2013. We invite all Class of 68 members and all interested Cal alumni and friends to join us for our quarterly gatherings, to participate in planning for Homecoming 2013, and to help build the Center on Civility and Democratic Engagement. Our next quarterly gathering is December 3rd. Just give us your contact information and we will be sure to include you. Outside the back doors, you will find email sign-up sheets as well as flyers describing the Center and the Goldman School of Public Policy, including its e-Digest newsletter. We can also be reached by email at cal68@blueconnect.org. And information on the Center is available on the Goldman School website. Just click on the icon for the Class of 68 and the Center. And now Class of 68 member Peter Munoz will speak to you about the Center at the Goldman School of Public Policy and today's panel discussion.
Good morning. I'm here to introduce the moderator, Dr. Christine Trost. We are especially honored to have her here as the moderator. You can see from the program flyer that she received her PhD in political science from Cal. While she was a student here at Cal, and she worked under Professor Bruce Kane, and she worked on a project with him, a Pew-funded project on in order to identify the best practices in political campaigns. She has written and edited journals and volumes on topics related to political ethics, campaign practices, civic and political engagement, including co-authoring Win the Right Way, How to Run Effective Local Campaigns in California, and Campaigning for Congress, Politicians at Home and in Washington. And I now want to welcome Dr. Christine Trost.
Thank you, Peter. Before we begin, I just want to thank Lynn Serta-Price for her magnificent work in organizing this event. You've just done a fabulous job, Lynn. I'd also like to thank the Center's co-directors, Henry Brady and Bruce Kane, and the members of the Center's advisory board for inviting me to serve on this panel. And I also want to commend the Center for its work on behalf of creating greater civility and democratic engagement in this country today, and for initiating a discussion on the Tea Party that seeks to better understand its motivations and its origins, rather than to simply dismiss it or defame it the way many commentators have done. And so I'm very honored to be serving on this panel today. I want to start by briefly introducing our three panelists in the order in which they will speak, and you can read more about them in the flyer. Each will talk for about 10 minutes, and that will be followed by a few specific questions directed at the group before we open it up to questions from you. And there will be representatives of the Class of 68 circulating in the audience with microphones, and so raise your hand and they'll come to you, and I'll call on you, and you'll have a chance to ask your question. So let me introduce our panelists. For many of you, Henry Brady, who has taught at Cal for more than 30 years, needs no introduction. He was, but I'm going to do it anyway. He is the class of 1941 Monroe Deutsch Professor of Political Science and Public Policy. In 2009, he was appointed Dean of the Goldman School. He is also co-director with Bruce Kane of the Center on Civility and Democratic Engagement. He is working on many projects, and among them is work on 2 new books, the first of which is due out next year and is entitled The Unheavenly Chorus, Political Inequality and the Broken Promise of American Democracy. And he's writing that book with Kay Schlossman and Sidney Verba, and it will be published by Princeton University Press. Next will be Larry Rosenthal. Dr. Lawrence Rosenthal is executive director and lead researcher of the Center for the Comparative Study of Right-Wing Movements here at UC Berkeley. Founded in the fall of 2009, the mission of the center is to nurture scholarship on the right, both in the US and in other parts of the world. Larry, who is a Cal alum, received his PhD in sociology here at UC Berkeley, and he is an expert on the right in the US and also in Italy. He is currently working on a book entitled The Insurgent Right, which examines the conservative movement in the United States, which came to national power in 1980. And finally, we are very fortunate to have with us Bill Whalen from Stanford's Hoover Institution. He's here today, and I'm sure you've seen him on television or heard him on the radio or read some of his thoughtful commentary in Hoover's Advancing a Free Society online publication. He's an expert on California's political landscape. He's a former political correspondent for Insight Magazine, which is the national news weekly and sister publication of the Washington Times, where he was honored for his profiles and analysis of campaigns and candidates, Congress, and the White House. In citing Whalen as one of its top 10 political reporters, the 1992 Media Guide said of his work, "The New York Times could trade 6 of its political writers for Whalen and still get a bargain." So those are our speakers today. I've been told I need to explain my red since I am a Cal alum, and I'll just say that in the spirit of civility and bridging, I thought it would appropriate. It's not going to fly. So.
Thanks, Christine. That was great. I want to also thank the Institute for the Study of Social Issues, where Christine works, for co-sponsoring this enterprise, and they helped bring together some of the speakers, which was very, very helpful. The Tea Party has been really on the front pages, something we've heard a lot about. It's not a new phenomenon in America, and indeed, it's a form of populism that we've seen many times before. You could argue that American politics is very much about, especially since the late 19th century, about the problem of dealing with big corporations and what big corporations sometimes did, especially in the 19th century. We're all familiar with that period of history. And with big government, which was an attempt to try to deal both with foreign policy problems, but also with big corporations. But getting the right balance between big corporations and big government. American populism is characterized by its dislike of big corporations and big government. That's probably the defining characteristic, a feeling that bigness is scary, bigness is problematic, and bigness is something that needs to be controlled in some way. And often there's an undercurrent of real anger about the big institutions, the banks, or the government, or whatever is causing trouble, it is thought, on the part of the populace out there. There's 2 variants of populism. There's left-wing populism and right-wing populism. Left-wing, American agrarian populism, the Populist Party of the 19th century, a labor populism. There's extreme versions of these, the Wobblies, labor anarchists, and others. This form of populism is worried about the railroads, the banks, big business. There's right-wing populism. It's worried about big government, also a little bit about big business, but mostly about big government. And its concerns historically have been things like immigration. The Know-Nothing Party was a good example of this. McCarthyism with its concern about communism. Its concern is with people who are different than the current folks who are in America. There's a relationship of American populism to third parties. There's the Populist Party, which was left-wing populism. There's the Know-Nothings, which was right-wing populism. One of the things I want to talk about is this the beginnings of a third-party movement, or is it something different? I'm going to conclude, and by the way, everybody should have a copy of the handout. Does everybody have that? That's got all the data here that I'm going to go through, not with every number, but to try to give you some idea what it all means. I'm going to conclude this. The Tea Party, as it now stands, is the right wing of the Republican Party, the extreme right wing of the Republican Party. It's unlikely that it's going to start a third party. It's definitely not like the Perot phenomenon of 1992, even though it shares a concern the Perot phenomena had, which was the concern with deficits and large American debts that we had. So let's get to the data. These data are based upon a May 2011 American National Elections Study. The American National Elections Studies are a series of studies that have been going on since 1948, that study of American elections. It's thought about as the gold standard of studying elections. This was an internet study. It's called Evaluations of Government and Society Study. It was done in May 2011, so just a few months ago. It's a nationally representative sample. It had the following question at the top of your handout. Do you support, oppose, or neither support nor oppose the Tea Party movement? Using that question, I took people who said they supported a great deal or supported a moderate amount and said, those are Tea Party supporters. Those are people who believe in the Tea Party. That gives us roughly something like 18% of the American public. You can come up with different definitions, but this one works for these data. Then what I did is the following, is I tried to say, well, who are the Tea Party folks, and how can I get a handle on them? So what I did is I took various groups in society which are politically oriented, like Democrats, independents, people who say they're neither Democrat nor Republican, Republicans, and then I broke down the Republicans into strong Republicans, and then we have the Tea Party. So if you look at the columns of all the tables there, they've got those groups. The first three are mutually exclusive and exhaustive. Everybody is in one of those categories, according to the survey, the way I've classified them. The strong Republicans, of course, are a subgroup of the Republicans. And the big question is where does that right-hand column, the Tea Party, actually fit? So let's look, first of all, at demographic characteristics. If you go across and look at those characteristics, you'll find that almost in every case, the Tea Party looks like the Republican Party. High incomes, a high percentage with college degree, older, large fraction percent white, non-Hispanic, low fraction black, high fraction who are married compared to the other groups. In terms of religious involvement, there's a question about how many days a year people attend church or other religious institutions. And here we find that the Tea Party looks a lot like strong Republicans, and not very much like Democrats or independents. And then there's two other questions. One that asks people if they're born-again Christians. And there again, Tea Party looks more like Republicans than anybody else. And another question is the Bible, the actual word, the absolutely true word of God, directly from God. And there, by the way, those percentages often surprise people in Berkeley, that the American public, even Democrats, have those high percentages. That's the way it is. That's what public opinion polling data tells us again and again. But here you'll see the Tea Party looks like Republicans, although actually less so with respect to those two attitudinal questions or two questions about religious beliefs. So here's the conclusion. The Tea Party on a demographic basis looks like the Republicans. It's maybe a little less religiously inclined than other Republicans. And we'll see in a minute that the focus is more on economic issues. If you turn over the page, you'll see what the vote looked like in 2008. And I just give you the percent vote for McCain and the percent vote for other groups. The residual is the vote for Obama. And what you see here is as we go from left to right, we basically go up in percentages. Tea Party supporters slightly lower than the strong Republicans and even the Republicans. But what's also interesting there is the fraction that say they voted for some other party. So that does give you some hint that maybe these folks are not completely committed to the Republican Party. But still, 84.7% of them, according to this survey, voted for McCain in 2008. On economic attitudes, there's the question we use all the time about government-guaranteed jobs. There's actually no plan, to my knowledge, for the government to guarantee people jobs, but somehow this question always really taps people's feeling about government and what it should be doing. And what you find there is that the Tea Party folks are the most opposed to anything that looks like government-guaranteed jobs. This shows you this undercurrent of real dislike of government. They really dislike the Obama health plan and dislike it more than any other group. They really believe that the tax cuts should be extended to all. In other words, what they believe is that the tax cuts should be extended to the upper income groups as well as the other income groups. They believe that unemployment insurance, 21% of them believe that unemployment insurance should be less than 26 weeks. And if you say, well, less than or equal to 26 weeks, you get 76% of them, 76.7%, who say that should be the case. In other words, they're against extending unemployment benefits. Again, they believe the government should not be bailing people out. People should get ahead on their own. Government should not guarantee jobs. It should not provide long-term unemployment insurance. There's a moral dimension to their concerns. They're opposed, 41.6% of them are opposed to gays in the military. If we had other issues like this, we'd probably find also that they're strongly anti-abortion and so forth. Maybe the most telling questions are the race and immigration questions. The percent who think little or no racial discrimination, 40%. That's a little less than strong Republicans, but it's right down the line for Republicans in general. Percent who believe that illegals should be made felons and sent home, pretty much the most extreme immigration proposal out there, almost a majority of the Tea Party supporters. Okay, what's going on here? The values, perceptions, and feelings try to give you a sense of what's animating the Tea Party. The percent who believe blacks would do better if they just tried harder, 73.4%, the highest percentage in that row. The percent who believe that there's less freedom than in 2008. Why that date? Well, of course, that's when Obama got elected. By the way, I love this question because I have no idea how you measure whether there's more or less freedom in America, but nevertheless, 80% of the Tea Party supporters and more believe there's less freedom, which is a lot different than the Democrats, who are at about 22%. Percent who are extremely or very angry, 2/3. Percent who are extremely or very afraid, almost 60%. So here you get a sense of folks who are very scared, very angry, very much believe government is in the way of making America great. And yet, when you ask them, do they blame Wall Street? Notice that 66% of them blame Wall Street. This is a really interesting feature of the Tea Party. That's higher by about 10 percentage points than strong Republicans and Republicans in general. In other words, they don't like big institutions, and it slops over into their dislike of Wall Street. They don't like big government, but they also don't like Wall Street particularly either. What does this all mean? Well, we've got a group of people who are very unhappy with Barack Obama and with American big government. They are the right wing of the Republican Party. They're not, however, a third party like Perot, and let me just end with these particular statistics. The Perot vote in 1992 included 20% Democrats, 53% independents, and 28% Republicans, spread all over the map. The Tea Party is 10% Democrats, 25% independents, and 70% Republicans. So this is a right-wing movement in America, angry, upset, mad at big government, but still, interestingly enough, not so happy with Wall Street either. Thanks.
Good morning. I want to thank the Center for sponsoring this, and also would like to thank the Goldman School. I want to make 3 points in the 10 minutes or so allotted for these remarks. The first point is to indicate that the limitations of populism as an explanation for the Tea Party. Populism only tells part of the story. There is a tradition of extreme conservatism that has been vying for control of the Republican Party since the New Deal. Back then, figures associated with this tendency included the DuPont brothers, who seem to have been resurrected 80 years later as the Koch brothers. The Tea Party then, without its populist numbers, might have been analogized to the Liberty League. What did these people hate? They hated the creation of a social safety net in the New Deal. It was attacked on moral grounds. People will exploit it rather than work. And they attacked the legalization of unions. What are the greatest Tea Party attacks these days are on these very spheres. The social safety net, with the 2009 Obamacare town hall meetings, or the public unions, what they're undergoing in under Tea Party governorships in places like Wisconsin and Ohio. What was the rhetoric back then in the New Deal? The rhetoric was Franklin Roosevelt was called a socialist, a fascist, a tyrant. He was responsible for the end of liberty. All of these, to anyone paying the slightest bit of attention, are staples of Tea Party rhetoric. After World War II, much of this view turned outward, the struggle of communism abroad, and fueled McCarthyism, and this took precedence over the attack on unions and social welfare. In fact, the conservative movement that came to power with the presidency of Ronald Reagan self-consciously read this extreme part of the right out of the movement as being too extreme. The big loser here was the John Birch Society, despite the fact that they had been substantially responsible for the nomination of Barry Goldwater in 1964. The funding that supports the Tea Party comes from this continuing sector of extremely conservative business in this country. In the Tea Party, they have found a vehicle for their continuing struggle to control the Republican Party. The second point I want to make is to specify a bit the nature of the populism of the Tea Party. There is a historical strain of right-wing populism in American politics, which often goes by the name of producerism. This is a view that separates the world into producers, that is, people who work, the virtuous people, and parasites. The parasites can be of two kinds: robber barons from the top, those who seem to be gaming a system that is rigged or a system they themselves have gamed, and those on the bottom, the lazy, the poor, the ones who don't work, and perhaps more important, don't want to work, which are often considered the same thing. Producerism, thus, is a point of view of a middle class that feels threatened and squeezed from both above and below, as though they were in a vice. In the Tea Party and the Remaking of Republican Conservatism, a study of the Tea Party, Theda Skocpol and her fellow researchers identified what they called deservingness as the Tea Party's key discriminator between themselves and those they so furiously oppose. The Tea Party feels under attack. In their view, they represent the real Americans who have worked hard, achieved comfort and security, with respect to entitlements like Social Security or Medicare, they are merely getting what they have earned. They feel besieged by the undeserving. From above, they are reacting to the beneficiaries of TARP, the big financial bailouts of the financial citadels, as it were. From below, they feel besieged by those they see as refusing to work and yet demanding what they, the Tea Partiers, have earned. The third point I want to make is to respond to the question of the Tea Party and the possibility of civil discourse. There is a widespread point of view in this country, especially among the commenting classes, on the equivalence of the far left and the far right. It is commonplace in the popular press, for example, to equate MoveOn.org with the Tea Party. I read both of these strains of blogs and websites and other literature. In terms of the hurling of epithets, the argument for equivalence is reasonable. T-shirts printed with "liberalism is a mental disorder" can be juxtaposed to "Wignut" or "the crazy." Calling the opposite number stupid also fits the equivalency theme. There's a kind of sibling quality to it. But there is something, and something absolutely fundamental, that is different, not equivalent, on the Tea Party right. This is related to the rhetoric of socialism, fascism, tyranny, stealing our liberty, that the Tea Party has inherited from the extreme right and has been with us since the New Deal. What American liberalism stands for in the eyes of the Tea Party is not simply a differing worldview, it is a foreign worldview. This creates a gulf that makes civil discourse impossible. The foreignness attributed to liberalism elides easily and frequently into talk of enemies and treason. These are very serious words and represent almost impenetrable blocks to civil discourse. Comparing Obama to Hitler and Stalin, for example. Who were Hitler and Stalin? Well, if you forget about the ideologies, they were not only foreign enemies, they were the greatest foreign enemies of this country in the 20th century. In the Bush years and before, these voices were outliers. When Bill Clinton took office, Rush Limbaugh began his programs by imitating the theme of Nightline. This is day one of the kidnapping. He did that about the beginning of the Clinton presidency. This is day one of the hijacking of America. Ann Coulter wrote a book called Treason, an analysis of the Democratic Party. Treason. Jonah Goldberg wrote a book that argued that the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton could be understood in the tradition of fascism that begins with Benito Mussolini. The National Review, a very serious conservative journal, their website ran a blog about this book for over a year. The point is, these voices are hardly outliers anymore. The rhetoric has become normalized in the republicanism of the Tea Party years. The second leading candidate for the Republican nomination for president recently called the chair of the Federal Reserve a traitor. I read the blog of something called the Tea Party Nation. The Democratic Party there is simply referred to as the party of treason. This is the deeper and ruinous meaning behind Sarah Palin's designation of what she and the Tea Party represents as the real Americans. What does that make? The liberals. Something other than Americans. It gives rise to notions of birtherism, of Obama as not an American, not born an American, which is believed by over 50% of the Tea Party, or that he's a Muslim, which is the new American enemy. There was an outstanding moment in the presidential campaign of John McCain. McCain had let what would become the Tea Party passion out of the bag, it seems to me, in his designation of Sarah Palin as his running mate. At a rally, a woman asked him to comment on the fact that his opponent, Barack Obama, was a Muslim. "No, ma'am," he said, or words to that effect. "He's a decent American family man." By and large, since the beginning of the Obama presidency, the Republican Party, its national leaders have refused again and again to draw the line that McCain drew. They are playing a dangerous game. Established conservatism in modern societies have made the choice of cultivating insurgent movements to their right before to the end of defeating their established opponents. It's like riding a tiger. And sometimes the established conservatives keep control, and sometimes they don't. But in either case, tolerating the rhetoric and ratifying the foreigner, enemy, traitor motif makes dialogue or civility with the Democrats impossible. Pardon me? Okay. Okay. Finally, I want to end on a note of optimism. The note of optimism, it shows my versatility, no? The note of optimism is about the Occupy Wall Street movement. And here's what's optimistic about that, with respect to civility, of all things. I discovered the other day, talking to the media, that I had a soundbite. The soundbite was the Tea Party is about what they think is being taken away from them. Occupy Wall Street is about what they think they'll never get. And the thing is the same thing. It's the decent middle-class life that seemed to be the American given. It was the world created by the greatest generation. It was their adult life was that. The Tea Party has come to the understanding that that's now in jeopardy, and they're acting out. Their ferocious response is, some people are going to take it away from us. People are trying to take it away from us. But really, there are structural things going on. For 30 or 40 years, the possibility of a middle-class life has eroded successively in America. Even people of the far right now accept that, you need to have two wage earners in a family these days, and so forth and so forth. And that continuing erosion hit with a force in 2008. The optimism is that the Tea Party may come to understand, and Occupy Wall Street may come to understand, that they're actually in the same boat. Thank you.
My God, look at all these bears. Okay, so you're wondering what I'm doing here. Nobody says no to Henry Brady, and the Stanford game doesn't kick off for 5 more hours. This is a timely discussion. There was a birthday in California this past Monday, which you may or may not have noticed. The initiative process turned 100. There was a special election on October the 10th, 1911, and the ballot initiative was born in California, for better or for worse, and that's an entirely different topic for another day. But that process was born out of what? A deep-rooted fear and frustration with special interest in California. So it's appropriate that we're talking about the Tea Party and this similar strain of politics. Whenever I get asked about how to analyze a political situation, my first advice is to do 2 things. Number 1, look for familiarity, and number 2, look for commonality. And there's a lot of familiarity with what we're talking about today. Before there was Occupy Wall Street, there was a gentleman named Huey Long, who was actually in politics before Henry Brady was teaching here at Berkeley. How many of you... Close. How many of you know who Huey Long was? Very good, very good. How many of you know what Huey Long's pitch was to the American people? Every man a king. And go onto YouTube and look this up. You'll be, first of all, shocked how low technology things were in the 1930s and how poor his presentation was. But very effective message, every man a king. What he was talking about was the 1% in America controlling 85% of the nation's wealth and 75% of the American people not having enough money to pay off their debt. And he struck a chord. And who knows where he would have gone if he had not met an unfortunate and premature end. Flash forward to today's Occupy Wall Street. Now the Tea Party. Is there a parallel to the Tea Party? Henry touched base with it. The Perotistas in 1992. Pat Buchanan, the Pitchfork Rebellion in 1992 and 96. What Christine did not mercifully mention in my political resume is that I worked on the Bush Quail campaign in 1992. In the Bush world, they put an L on that because that's the only time, the 6 times that the father and the son ran on a November ticket, it's the only time in a national election one of them managed to lose. Now in 1992, we were like Wile E. Coyote in the Roadrunner cartoon. We got knocked over by an Acme van in one direction, which was Ross Perot, and we got up and dusted ourselves and got knocked over and run over in another direction by Pat Buchanan. We couldn't quite figure out what was going out there, but in 1992, there was this unrest, which you see now at the Tea Party. Now, before my professional life, before my college years, I was in grade school. And for 4 years of my grade school, I labored under the rule of a Latin teacher. I had to take Latin for 4 years. So my Latin training, which comes in very handy if you do crossword puzzles, and grooms you for a wonderful career as a pharmacist, by the way, But the one thing which you learn in Latin is you become very sensitive to what's singular and what's plural. Media, for example. Media refers to television, newspapers, radio. It's a plural. So when we speak of the media, we should speak of media as a they, not an it. Larry, in his presentation, I don't know if he meant to or not, but he referred to the Tea Party as a they. Let me emphasize that to you, that the Tea Party is indeed a they. Next year, there will be a Democratic National Convention in Charlotte. Barack Obama will give a nice speech. There will be a Republican National Convention in Tampa. God knows who will give, we hope, from my side at least, a good speech. The point is, there are national organizations which are very focused, and they deliver a candidate who goes on the ballot in 50 states. The Tea Party is a they in this respect. Who is the Tea Party? There's Tea Party Express, there's Tea Party Patriots. There are easily a half a dozen other entities around America which don't have Tea Party in the name, but all claim credit. If you remember after the 2010 midterm election on election night, how many people came forward and claimed to be the voice of the Tea Party? Next year, the Tea Party will not put a candidate on the ballot. The Tea Party is a they. And that, to me, is what's interesting about watching this movement and where it goes next. To me, the Tea Party faces a fork in the road come 2012. You will see the Tea Party very actively engaged in congressional elections. The Koch brothers, Americans for Prosperity, they're going to put about $100 million in congressional elections. That's 2.5 times what they spent in 2010. They're playing for keeps in the House, and they're playing for keeps in the Senate. The idea being they will put the Republicans over the top. They only need 4 seats to get the Senate. It seems doable. Freedom Works, which is Dick Armey and Steve Forbes, they're going to spend about $45 to $50 million, and they spent pennies, peanuts, in the last election. They're playing to keep too, and they're focused on the congressional election. But if you're a Tea Party advocate, if you're a Tea Partier, and you look at the presidential field, what do you got? This week, and I emphasize this week, it's Herman Cain. And before that, it was Rick Perry. And before that, it was Michelle Bachmann. And before that, it was Sarah Palin, waiting for Godot or some other Republican to come in and run. The Tea Party does not have a national candidate. You look at Henry's statistics, and one of the most interesting one that stands out to me is look at McCain's numbers in 2008 vis-a-vis what he got among Tea Partiers and what he got among Republicans. His percentage, I don't have it here in front of me, I believe was 88% for the Tea Party, 84% for the Republicans. That's good news and bad news. On the one hand, thank you, okay. That tells you the Tea Party was on board with McCain. Now, if Mitt Romney is the nominee, it ain't gonna happen. They have a lot of problems with Mitt Romney. And if you look at the Republican field right now, notice that Mitt Romney cannot crack 25 to 30% in the polls. There is a ceiling that he faces right now, no more than 30%. Meanwhile, the other 70% is out there circling, trying to find something else, and right now it's Herman Cain. So to me, the question is, where does the Tea Party go in that national election? In 2010, the Tea Party was very effective, and this is the challenge that faces Occupy Wall Street, I think, but the Tea Party was wildly successful in 2 respects. Number one, for a large, spread out movement, it had amazing message discipline. It didn't get sidetracked, it stayed focused on spending. And then secondly, for a very wide spread out movement, it channeled its energy, and it channeled it into Republican candidates, and that's why John Boehner and not Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the House right now. It channeled. If I'm Occupy Wall Street, this is what I'm looking at, how to focus my message, and then if that power can be channeled into political gains. This is why you might get emails from SCIU or the California Teachers Association trying to get you involved in this movement. It's why CTA is talking and planning about possibly doing an initiative next year on raising taxes in California. It's the idea that if you split an atom, you can actually drive the power into something for your means. But I mentioned commonality a second ago, and I didn't get into that. I apologize for that. But if you look at the Tea Party and look at Occupy Wall Street, there are 3 traits to remember, 3 important traits that they do have in common. Number one is TARP, the bank bailout. Both absolutely hate it. And it's a driving force behind a lot. What do? They're mad at the banks. They're mad at Wall Street. Issue number 2, both believe the American dream, if it's not dead, it's seriously endangered. Although this is where the 2 groups split. To Occupy Wall Street, the American dream is embodied in what? Civil liberties for the most part. The Tea Party looks at the American dream, and they look at government role in your life. So they have different definitions of what exactly is wrong with the American dream, but they both think that it's in serious trouble. And then the third thing they have in common is each one is feels alienated by the political ruling class. And that's why they're out there looking for a candidate, shopping for a different party movement. Now, to me, this is the question coming up in 2012. The Tea Party has shown that it can be very effective in 2010 in congressional races. Perhaps it will be again, but How many cycles can it continue? How long did Ross Perot and his movement last in politics? Wildly effective in 1992, cost George Bush his job. Not so effective in 1996, he wore out his welcome pretty fast. How about Pat Buchanan? When's the last time anybody talked about Pat Buchanan running for president? No, he's gone. So that is the question, does the Tea Party have similar legs or not? I think the Tea Party can be very, very effective in various states around the country, in various races. But the challenge for it is moving ahead. Does it want to become a national party or not? Plain and simple. Just as Occupy Wall Street, if it feels alienated from the Democratic Party, will it form its own party or not? This, to me, presents a very interesting potential for American elections down the road, where instead of a rather, bland choice between a Republican and a Democrat, you could actually have up to 4 entities on a ballot to look at. And you could look at a Tea Party candidate, you could look at an Occupy candidate, a Democrat candidate, and a Republican candidate, give you more choices or not. So this, to me, is why this is a fascinating study or not. We can spend all day trying to kind of analyze how much Tea Partiers make, what their real views are of the world, what they like to do for lifestyle and choices and all that. But to me, it's all about how they can convert their political currency. And the other thing about the Tea Party, which I'd caution you about, is sometimes beware of your own success. They've been very effective at electing Republicans in 2010. I suspect they'll be very effective at electing Republicans to Congress in 2012. But what happens when those Republicans are on the job for 2, 4, 6, 8 years? Rand Paul from Kentucky, what can he really get done in Congress? So the Tea Party will start looking at its successes in Congress, but then maybe 1 or 2 terms into it, start asking, what have we really achieved? And that, to me, again, raises the question of will it be a national party movement, or if it's going to recede born out of its own frustration. So I think it's just a really, really fun thing to talk about. I think it's great that actually both sides have energy in this election cycle, and thanks for having me here.
So now we're going to put our mics on, and we're going to have a little bit of a discussion. I'm an optimist at heart, and so I want to pick up on something that Larry said and follow up on something that Bill talked about and get Henry into this discussion as well. And I'm going to do that by asking a question that was provided by one of the members of the Center's class of 1968. An excellent question, and if this is your question, I want you to raise your hand and claim credit for it, because it's really good. But this really, I think, brings together a lot of what both of you talked about, and it gets us to think in terms of the focus of the center, which is encouraging civility and engagement. So here's the question. The Tea Party movement and the Occupy Wall Street and other locations, which now seems to be global, today at least, these two movements seem to have tapped into a common undercurrent of public sentiment against a government viewed as non-responsive to a significant percentage of the electorate. Although the two movements approach this problem of the government's non-responsiveness from very different political perspectives, but they do seem to share this in common. So the question is this a common theme in prior populist movements? And can this point of commonality form a basis for the members of the two movements to work together at some point in the future, such as disparate groups in the past, perhaps those who ultimately formed the Republican Party, ex-Whigs, anti-slavery groups? Like, is there an opportunity for, we're talking about a third party option, is it possible that, I mean, your public opinion data seems pretty pessimistic on this question, but maybe each of you can comment on this optimistic scenario.
Okay. Is this working?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. The thing about as I suggested in my remarks, I think the fact that the American dream as a material thing, as a middle-class life as we've known it, is in jeopardy. This is cutting across class lines, it's cutting across gender lines, it's cutting across racial lines. It's something which we now have 40 to 65-year-old men who have been earning $100,000 a year unemployed and likely to remain long-term unemployed. this is an unusual problem. We haven't confronted this before, and so the opportunity for perceiving common interests, it seems to me, lay in this collective or shared sense of closed-off opportunity, and that combined with a notion of the extreme inequality, which economic inequality, which now resembles the period of the 1920s in this country. Those two factors provide a potential basis for perceiving a common interest.
Henry, what do you think, though, given the public opinion data?
Well, let me just first step back and say that I think I started my talk with saying that it's been a problem of American capitalism, of all capitalist systems actually, of balancing big business with big government. And the solution that was achieved during the New Deal era was the welfare state, the social welfare state. That's part of what's under attack right now, with people worrying, especially on the right, that it's become too generous and too problematic in terms of not really getting people to work enough. And that's one of the big problems right now, is to the degree that folks on the right think that the social welfare state has gone too far, it's going to be really hard for the left to jump in and join with them in that kind of critique. And that's the tremendous chasm that we have. The whole deficit reduction and attempts to try to deal with the long-term debt of the United States, these are really fundamentally about that particular issue. Are we going to reduce Social Security payments or increase the age of retirement? Are we going to change Medicare in some fundamental ways? That's what that's about right now. And I don't see anybody right now who has a really good way of talking about those problems that sort of gets towards the center of the spectrum and brings us together instead of pushing us apart.
Yeah, can everybody hear me? In terms of the Tea Party, for example, it's interesting that going back to that election night in 2010, the people who came forward tended to be Sarah Palin, Dick Armey, J.D. Hayworth, the former congressman from Arizona, all former politicians. Richard Riordan, the former mayor of Los Angeles, has an interesting phrase for his frustration with teachers in Los Angeles don't perform well, how they get shuffled around between schools. He calls it the dance of the lemons. And you can argue that we have a problem in politics, and that, at least on the Tea Party side, there's sort of a dance of lemons in terms of who's coming forward to represent the Tea Party. But you notice that two flaming, raging capitalists seem to have caught the Tea Party's fancy at different points this year. One, Herman Cain, who just forever is running on the metaphor of running government as a business, which drives me nuts. The second one being the Donald, who, yeah, he's a cartoon, but he strikes with people in some way. So this gets what Henry was talking about. We can talk about third-party candidates all we want to, and it's like a very wild steed out there in the pasture waiting to be saddled. But who rides the steed in American public? Who, and I'd contend it'd have to be probably a non-politician, because they wouldn't want to have a voting record, a political record which would brand them. Who do you see in the non-political world out there who can move forward as a third-party candidate, who can bridge at least one of these movements, draw in independence, and be a centrist candidate? If that person is out there, I would like to meet him or her.
Good. Here's another question, also offered by a member of the center. Many progressives and liberal pundits tend to dismiss the Tea Party movement as an artificial construct formed and run by Republican strategists. But the movement has demonstrated staying power, popular support, and a mind of its own, independent of the Republican leadership. So 2 questions. Have prior populist movements demonstrated a similar independent streak that was difficult for the established parties to control? And do you think that this is likely to continue? Or will the more committed leaders of the Tea Party either be taken in by the establishment leadership, or will they burn out? This is another question about the future of the Tea Party.
Well, let me just say briefly, I think that there's no question but that the Tea Party has shown its independence, and I think will continue to do so. But I do think there's also the question of whether the people elected to Congress, where they're going to go, whether they're going to be tamed by Congress or not. I think they're not going to be tamed by Congress. I think they're going to continue the way they are. But they're going to also get frustrated with not being able to do anything. And then the question, as Bill pointed out, is what happens next?
Right. Yeah, this is kind of analogous to the recall election back in 2003, which I assume many of you lived through as well, which once it actually got underway, just like the cliche about victory, it had 1,000 fathers. And you had talk radio people taking credit for it, Republican strategists taking for it, grassroots activists, and so on and so forth. But it came forward for a lot of reasons. Here's the thing, though, about the Tea Party being controlled by the Republican Party. If the Tea Party is controlled by the Republican Party, how do you explain Sharon Angle in Nevada? How do you explain Christine O'Donnell in Delaware? And this is the problem Republicans come up against. It's not just what Henry and I are talking about in terms of how the Tea Party actually gets an agenda through Congress. It's finding people who pass your litmus test to be on the ballot. And if there is a flaw in the Tea Party, it is that they have rather unrealistic standards sometimes when it comes to putting people on the ballot. They're not sufficiently realpolitik. You take a Christine O'Donnell or Sharon Angle, and these are people designed to lose. But yet the Tea Party is so focused and hell-bent on what it wants to do that it's willing to lose a few seats to go on with the greater mission.
Let me restate that in a little bit stronger terms. There is something of a civil war going on in the Republican Party. The Civil War dates from certainly the 2008 election. Almost immediately after the 2008 election, at the level of the talking classes, you had a distinction between, say, the Rush Limbaugh side, which said, we're going to bring down Obama, we will attempt to make him fail. And you had a side which was perhaps epitomized by David Brooks of the New York Times, who attempted to say, okay, this is the moment at which the Republican Party needs to make a change. To a very great extent, it seems as though that civil war has been won, or is being won by the, in effect, Limbaugh side, and that seems nothing indicates that so much as the emergence of the Tea Party, which now has a kind of litmus test, as Bill said, for candidates. But it leaves people like John Boehner in an almost impossible situation. And how he's going to handle that is an open question. We've been watching it, and open question actually is a good statement of how he's handled it. On the other hand, what this has done, it seems to me, from the Democratic side, is it has opened up the potential to run for re-election for the Obama campaign as trying to exploit that civil war in the Republican Party, and it has made him and the Democrats less responsive to the demands of their own constituency.
I still think, by the way, Mitt Romney is going to be the nominee of the Republican Party. Right. The question is when Mitt Romney, as you pointed out, becomes the nominee, what's going to happen to the Tea Party folks? Are they going to say, we're not going to go out and work for that guy? And is that going to cause problems for the Republicans?
Yeah, Civil War, I think, is just a little too harsh here. Dan Schnur, who for years was a colleague of Henry's here at Berkeley before he went to that school down in Southern California.
Played football Thursday night against us, yes.
Yes, whose initials we
what
dare not
was that
speak.
School?
Yes. Otherwise, it was a Berkeley safety school, right?
That's right.
Right. Dan, by the way, we have a camera in the back, so if any of you applaud for something I say, you're on record. So. Be careful, you may be stripped your Berkeley privileges. Dan coined a phrase for the Republicans in California. He called it a circular firing squad. And that was the idea. The Republicans are forever having primaries in California where they manage to pick somebody who is fundamentally unelectable. Why? We tend to pick somebody who is too conservative and more times than not pro-life in a state that a majority of voters are pro-choice. But To what Larry was talking about, the Civil War, this argument's been going on in the Republican Party since George H.W. Bush left office. And Bob Dole came along in 1996 and was just a very bad, milquetoasty, processed Senate kind of candidate. George W. Bush came along and very effectively, quietly tamped it down. But then as Bush started to wind down in his presidency, it picked up again, the result being McCain. There's just been this ongoing dynamic in the Republican Party for years so much what the Tea Party steps into. And it's been an argument over abortion. Another enormous argument, and it's one that has killed Rick Perry's candidacy, is legal immigration. Yeah. So it's the Tea Party is stepping into a time where Republicans have a lot of differences on a lot of issues. The Tea Party's, although interesting enough, doesn't get into immigration that much, does it, Henry? It's mostly focused on spending.
It's amazingly how much it really focuses upon the economic issues. By the way, too, I think we should all understand these are folks who really are feeling tremendous pain. And so there should be some empathy, or if not empathy, at least some sympathy for them with respect to the problems they face. I don't think they should be just dismissed as a bunch of crazies. They are folks who are feeling real pain. And as a political scientist, this is something that seems to me you have to worry about with any political system, is when you got a bunch of people who are feeling a lot of pain, and the Occupy Wall Street people are another such group, that's a problem for a political system, and that can lead to problems.
Okay, last question, then we'll turn it open to the audience. This question touches on some of what you're talking about now and gets back to a point that Larry made about the impenetrable blocks to civil discourse and the gulf that makes civil discourse impossible. So I'd like to hear what your thoughts on this. Tea Party leaders and its supporters seem to have a level of commitment similar to the supporters of abolition, women's suffrage, and prohibition, where compromise was not an acceptable alternative. Is this a correct assessment? And if so, what can be done over time to stimulate civility and cooperation between Tea Party members and politicians on the other side of the aisle? And will the media buy into any such efforts, since the media appears to favor discord over cooperation? A fight makes for better news than cooperation. Phil?
Let me give you a window into my world. Every so often I get a call from a Fox News or a CNN or an MSNBC, and they want me to go on their show and they want me to be the Republican stooge. They want me to go on and sit in a satellite studio somewhere in Palo Alto and get into an argument with somebody I've never met involving a candidate who I probably don't support. But unfortunately, this is the nature of cable news today. It is a 24-hour, 24/7 culture which is based on what? Controversy, division, argument, which is driven by the Drudge Report, which is driven by a lot of blogs in part. So there are a lot of facets to cleaning up our political process. Yes, we need, frankly, I think we need a better class of people running for office. We just need some giants. Who in the United States Senate right now do you think is worthy of being in statutory hall in the Senate? Not too many. It's kind of a low ebb, it seems. The House, not too many giants either, in my opinion. We need a better ilk of people running, but the media have to do a better job. Media, plural, have to do a better job as well. They have to foster discourse, if you will. And it's just, to me, I'm sorry not to filibuster here, but it's a frustration. Every 4 years, reporters gather at the Kennedy School at Harvard, that other Berkeley fallback school on the East Coast. And they sit around and they pontificate and they talk about the horrors of covering campaigns, how they feel frustrated, the candidates are ever trying to dodge their questions, and they all very somberly say, by God, we're not going to make it a horse race the next time around. We're going to talk about issues, and we're going to talk about resumes and experience. And so what do we have here? Every week there's a screaming headline about who's up and who's down in the Republican polls. So there's a lot to clean up in our process, I think, besides trying to, if the goal is to try to get that civil discourse.
And it's hard to know where it's going, given that the newspaper seems to be going downhill, and that was the place where you could get in-depth analysis. And there just doesn't seem to be a lot of places where you go on TV and you find people talking civilly in an interesting way. Fareed Zakaria is one of the places I go because I just find his program to be very interesting, where they actually talk about issues, and at the end of the hour you go, gee, I learned something. Yeah. But that's not the point of a lot of the cable television. And I watch a lot of left and right-wing cable television as part of my job. And also just keeps me juiced up.
I don't know of the solution to how you get out of this morass of people shouting at each other and shouting back at each other. The one thing that I would add to this conversation is the unique quality of Fox News, especially the unique quality of Fox News relative to the Tea Party. the Fox News had an organizing function in the Tea Party. Fox News sent, there will be an event here, and sent their people and covered it and led cheers and things of that nature. So the relationship between, if the Tea Party, if we take seriously the word party, the relationship between the Tea Party and Fox News is a novel development in American life, and one which pushes this intractability much further down the road.
Okay, let's get some questions from the audience. How about you in the front row? Do we have a mic?
We have a microphone.
Everybody wait until the mic comes around.
Right here in the purple blouse.
Hi. Yeah, with regards to the possibility of a third party, I know that the anti-Wall Street people, I know a lot of them, are strongly anti-Obama, more in line with Dennis Kucinich and Bernie Sanders. But the problems that they face in upcoming elections are, number one, the vote ringing, which there is no attempt to get a handle on, and number two, the Electoral College, which literally prevents any third party seemingly from becoming elected president. Do you see any ways that a third party might be able to overcome these obstacles to get elected?
I actually think the third party is the biggest problem they face is getting on the ballot in all the states. Right. That's incredibly hard. I mean, there's one thing the two parties absolutely agree upon, and that is, actually their first thought is one party would be best, but their second thought is, well, two parties is pretty good, and three parties is really a terrible idea. So they find ways to make it very hard to get on the ballot in most states. And the net result is that you can't really get a third party campaign going very easily.
Yeah, Henry's right. When Ralph Nader was looking at running in 2004, the Democratic National Committee, the first thing it did was to send out a memo to every Democratic governor it could find across America and say, by God, you and your Democratic Secretary of State, you make it as difficult as you can for this man to get on the ballot in your state. The problem that a Kucinich or Bernie Sanders faces in running for national office is a recognition that that's the end of their political career. Kucinich, I don't know, unless the schedule works in Ohio where Kucinich could try to run for a while, or if they have a Texas law where you could do two candidacies at the same time, but it's the end of the road for you as a candidate. So if I'm Kucinich or I'm Bernie Sanders, do I want to basically break away from the Democratic Party, my cozy little nook in Congress, or do I see this, running for president as maybe, becoming part of a third-party movement which lasts, which gets to what I was talking earlier about the Tea Party not having a figurehead. It's the same question for Occupy Wall Street. Who can go on TV and speak? Who is the spokesman for Occupy Wall Street?
One other point about the third party is that the experience of Ralph Nader, especially in 2000, has put a lot of people off the possibility of a third party. George Bush won the election in Florida by 537 votes. Ralph Nader had something like 90,000 votes in Florida and New Hampshire, and spent the last weekend of the campaign actually campaigning in Florida. So there is a bad taste in the mouth to many from the experience of Nader in 2000 and the subsequent experience of the Bush presidency.
Okay, this gentleman here. Do we have the mic? Great.
Hello. In trying to understand where we are and where we're headed, I think back to the last time the country was this divided, 1968 and the Vietnam War. I think back to outliers and radicals like SDS, and you can name a few other groups. So for me, I'm not thinking that the Tea Party is really any kind of a viable candidate to become a third party. I don't think that's possible. But what is their role? What is the role of an outlier and a radical movement? And I would say SDS was, and I think probably Tea Party is now too. What role do they serve in the process, and where are we headed? Last weekend, George Will said the conservatives ought to just let the Occupy Wall Street go at it, because back when we had all those several years of demonstrations, it looked like a Democratic victory at the time and turned into a Republican landslide later.
Yeah. I wish that people would look at these movements and understand that on the one hand, Occupy Wall Street is upset with Wall Street, and of course, Also, as I said, the Tea Party's upset with Wall Street. And I hope there'd be a recognition that that really is a problem and a concern. On the other hand, the Tea Party is very concerned about big government. And I would hope that liberals would look and see and understand that this is something to be concerned about, that there are issues regarding big government in America, pension plans, deficit problems, and so forth. And they have to be addressed. And if we don't address them, there's going to be problems.
Yeah, I agree. I think it'd be very interesting if C-SPAN were willing to sponsor a Tea Party, Occupy Wall Street debate. Because, and kind of hear the two talk about the various issues. Occupy, for example, in fact, I stole this from George Will's article because he talked about the various things that Occupy is after. They want a $20 an hour minimum wage. They want to end the quote-unquote fossil fuel economy. They want open borders, $1 trillion new spending for infrastructure, $1 trillion for ecological restoration, and free college educations, which I don't think the UC Regents would be too wild about. But these are all, whether you agree with those or not, these are very worthy discussions. It'd be a good conversation to have. And maybe this goes back to our other question about how you promote civility. Maybe if the two sides can, God forbid, kind of put down the signs and get together and talk it out between each other, maybe that help moves us forward.
Now
back to the real world.
It's not often people regard me as such, but I appreciate that. Okay, to answer your question about in effect, where this goes and the possibility of a third party, I think that, if you take the example of SDS, to some extent the pressure of what SDS represented changed the Democratic Party from 1968 to 1972 in terms of process, how candidates were selected, and so forth. By analogy, you could look at the effect of Christian conservatism in the 80s and 90s on the Republican Party. Christian conservatism insisted upon its role and succeeded in making it a role for itself inside the party. And so it seems to me that one of the likely or one of the possible outcomes of the Tea Party is to move the Republican Party decisively to the right. The problem with that, which was discussed a lot in 2008, immediately after the election, was, does that make the Republican Party a regional party, a rump party, a southern party, no longer a national party? And that's, perhaps civil war is too strong a term, but I'll stand by it.
Just a quick historical detail is SDS, interestingly enough, was against big government and was for local community control, which is an interesting strain from the left.
Okay, we've got another question.
Hi. I just had a question for Mr. Whalen. There was something that he said at the beginning that I'm still a little hung up on, and that was that he compared Huey Long to Occupy Wall Street. And just sort of the nuance of that kind of bothers me, specifically with that, like, Joseph Stiglitz is giving speeches at Occupy Wall Street, and they're setting up lending libraries. And Huey Long was by no means somebody with a lot of intellectual heft that he threw around. And so while I see the comparison, I just feel like it's a little superficial. And if you could just elaborate on what caused you to make that instant familiar association, and if, under some scrutiny, whether or not it's really one that's worth saying.
Well, the comparison is simply this. There is a born frustration in Occupy Wall Street that there's 1% of the country which is unfairly getting away with murder. Huey Long talked about a 1% in America, which was the Rockefellers, the Astors, the Vanderbilts, who were getting away with murder, coddled, plain and simple. Occupy Wall Street is dealing with talks to a 90% public, which he views as have-nots. Huey Long was talking about a 75% of the public, which he viewed as have-nots as well. Both were trying to strike a populist strain in the middle of economic bad times. That's plain and simple. Yeah, Huey Long was, believe me, he was hardly an intellectual or anything like that. He was just a maniacal politician. But the point is, the opportunity and sort of the same sort of breeding ground then exists now. That's my contention. Follow up?
Yeah, but then just to clear it, I mean, I feel like that kind of comparison would just, if anything, make the the kind of important engagement and discussion that we need to have that much more difficult to get, because the difference between now and then is that when you have people like Joseph Stiglitz, giving credence to this movement, people with serious academic and intellectual backgrounds who are, trying to further great discussion in this country, I feel as if to some extent that when you make these comparisons, it ends up setting us back because you're not really getting anywhere. So my question is this: if we're really supposed to bring discussion further and get these people on C-SPAN, if we're just going to make these really abject comparisons, then how is that going to in any way move us forward?
Well, have them go on C-SPAN and talk it out and hear the question. My point is just that there are similarities between what Long was talking about then and what Occupy Wall Street is talking now. So I'm not saying that today's Occupy Wall Street people are Huey Long and they're modern dictators saying that. I'm just trying to point out that just there are similar conditions between now and 80 years ago in this country, and there's always been this sort of populist strain that both the left and the right tap into in their various ways. Not trying to insult Occupy Wall Street by doing that.
Woman here in the black, right here. Stand up, please. Can you stand up? Great. Okay.
In blue and
Can you
gold.
stand up? Yeah. Great.
As if you people up there who are so marvelous don't have enough responsibility educating our next generation of poli-sci pundits and trying to educate we old folks. I'd like to ask you a favor, to add to your duties. You're already doing it, I know, to some extent, since it seems learning how to have discourse and find the commonality that you all have pointed out. If you could spend another inch or two of your time writing more op-ed pieces, of organizing your professorial peers all across the country, trying to get your message that we heard just smatterings of today and moved us all so much. If you could just work a few extra hours and put out more things in the paper and on TV and maybe shape the media a little bit, because you do have import and you're our only hope.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You back could stand up, this gentleman, yeah, and you'll be next. Okay.
Okay, Professor Brady, I wonder if, two quick questions. Did you drill down any further in dealing with Tea Party activists, the folks who are on the front lines, who will be turning out the Iowa caucus, who go the extra mile? And the second question I had for the whole panel is, to what degree do you regard the Tea Party as a grassroots movement, and to what degree do you regard it as an astroturf movement? You know what I'm saying here. And is this potentially in the case of the Koch brothers, be careful what you wish for? Thank you.
All movements have leaders, ultimately. So you don't get any movement that just sort of spontaneously grows up unless it really is a riot. And the Tea Party's not that, and so clearly it's got leaders. Yeah, the Fox News helped move it along, but I think it's also got its own individual impetus, as the public opinion data show. We got people who are angry and afraid. They were looking for something to coalesce around. They coalesced around the series of issues that they're focused on right now, especially economic issues. In terms of the activists, yeah, I have looked at them. They look a lot like the supporters there in terms of their characteristics and so forth, except that they're just a little more active in politics, and they're going to be out there doing things. I think what's interesting is that they are even a little bit more third-party oriented, maybe about double the percentage from what I showed you for the supporters. So maybe, I think it was 5% for the supporters, it's about 10% for the activists.
Yeah, the astroturf versus grassroots question is an important one. For people who are not familiar, grassroots are suggest a movement which is authentic and comes out of the people. Astroturf is fake grass. It's a phrase that has arisen in the politics of and advocacy of recent years, where groups organize themselves with names like peoples, and they're actually some guy in an office somewhere in Alexandria, Virginia, with a mailing list. Okay, so the point about the Tea Party is, in fact, it has both sides. There's no doubt about it. And to talk about the AstroTurf side in no way diminishes the authenticity of its movement side. To the extent to which one can distinguish, there is considerable at this point analysis which shows that the AstroTurfers actually did self-consciously try to create a movement, and they succeeded beyond their wildest expectations. As somebody once put it, they built a stadium, and people came to the stadium. They filled it up. However, once people fill it up, it's no longer manageable, controllable. It's no longer, the AstroTurfers' domain to do with as they see fit. So it does have both of those elements.
Yeah, and you keep seeing mainstream Republicans, for example, right now telling us that the recession and the crash was all about government doing things wrong. And I think they're losing the Tea Party people when they say things like that. The Tea Party people don't believe that at all.
Yeah, it's look, you probably know the phrase AstroTurf because Nancy Pelosi used it to insult the Tea Party movement, saying it was not organic. In getting my remarks together, I thought I'd do a clever thing, and I'd go onto teapartypatriots.org and count all the local chapters around the country just to talk about the whole idea of this being a widespread movement. And I looked at it, and it was dizzying. And so I went to California, and I got even more dizzy because the print's very tiny. The point is, there are about 240 chapters of teapartypatriots.org just here in California, and that's getting in the Tea Party. That, to me, suggests that this is grassroots. It's widespread and all that. But I judge grassroots in part by lasting power. And part of the lasting power is going to be, are they can continue to play ball in further congressional elections? Will they come on board with Mitt Romney? I agree with Henry. I think Romney is going to be the nominee. By the way, why do you think Mitt Romney is turning into a China basher? Because one thing which Tea Partiers hate is free trade. The Tea Party movement had a bad week in Congress last week when Congress passed 3 free trade bills. They don't want to hear that. This gets in the congressional thing we talked about. But look, I think for the time being, it's a grassroots movement. Maybe the grass eventually browns out, but for now, I think it's legitimate grass.
So the gentleman in the back in the blue shirt, and then we'll come back up here.
Thank you. We all know that life can be unfair sometimes, so I have an unfair question. I'd be very interested in who each of you thinks will be the nominee. We've heard 2 votes from the Republican side. We've heard 2 nods towards Romney. There's been some musing about how the Tea Party will respond, but I'd love to have a more specific thought of how will they respond to Romney, and does our third panelist feel it will be Romney as well? And then what will be the effect on the election and who will be president of the United States?
I admire your facility with unfairness. I don't think it's such a clear path for Romney. I think it is the most likely alternative. However, the fate of Sharon Angle winning a primary and Christine O'Donnell, thank you, winning a primary, suggests that the Tea Party has proven itself capable of walking out on the established Republican and nominating someone who it would appear would have little chance of winning. There was actually a similar kind of debate in the Democratic Party in 2004, Howard Dean versus John Kerry. The argument for Kerry was electability. The question is, does the Tea Party get won over to electability, to the electability argument? And given the alternative, one would think, yeah, they'll probably do that. But that's, I hesitate to use the word rationality, rationality has proven to be a thin reed sometimes. So I'm not sure about that. I think Barack Obama is, as I suggested earlier, at least until his recent turn toward partisanship, was relying on the Republicans more or less to implode. That seemed to be his campaign strategy. And that may be changing a little bit. What he's done is, he's basically crossing his fingers and hoping that Romney isn't nominated. Is not nominated, yeah, right. and that there would be one of these two far-out candidates. I think that's playing with fire. The circumstance, if there is a crisis, either economic or national security crisis or an attack or something like that, then that calculus goes out the window. So I think what Obama's doing or has been doing prior to this turn toward partisanship is a bit playing with fire.
Yeah, given the pinball machine of the primaries, obviously the path for Romney is difficult. Perry has a lot of money, too, so there's the possibility he could resurrect himself, but he's certainly got to get a persona that looks a little better than what we've seen so far, which it sort of looks like he's not ready for prime time. In terms of who will win the election, I think Larry's exactly right. I think the questions of the economy, and it's real problematic right now. There's all sorts of difficulties. You just can't go into an election with 9% unemployment and have much faith you're going to win. And it's conceivable we might even have some continuing really bad news in that front. And then, of course, there's always the foreign policy crisis, although that could lead immediately to a rally around the flag. But if then there was some problems with how he handled it, that could lead to problems. So it might be the timing of such an event.
Yeah, if I knew who the next president would be, I would ask all of you for money. I would go somewhere overseas, make a very large bet, and we'd all be very happy. You look at the Republican field, and if it's not Romney, who is it going to be? And Henry mentioned Rick Perry, who, like Romney, has about $15 million in the bank. Peanuts compared to Barack Obama, who's at about $60 million and climbing. But the Tea Party is looking for somebody other than Romney. Conservatives who are not Tea Partiers necessarily looking for somebody other than Romney. But guess what? Eventually it comes to voting time. Republicans faced it in 2008. And you had John McCain, and you had Mike Huckabee, and Rudy Giuliani, and Mitt Romney. And in the end, it was McCain getting it in a very kind of bruising, muscular way of just going out and getting 35% of the vote. Now, back then, in 2008, winner take all in early states. This is an important difference this time around. McCain could get 35% of the Florida vote and win every delegate in Florida. This time around, every primary before April is done just on a percentage. So this means perhaps a more protracted, drawn-out Republican campaign, and this is one of the reasons why Barack Obama, who does have a lot of problems running uphill, this is one thing going to his advantage. The idea that Republicans could have a drawn-out campaign where they just dump on each other day in and day out. How many of you remember the 1988 campaign, George Bush and Mike Dukakis, and Willie Horton? Where did Willie Horton come from? Came from Al Gore, actually. Al Gore in the New York primary used Willie Horton against Mike Dukakis. The Bush campaign picked that up, put it in the mental Rolodex in the general election. Out came Willie Horton. This is the problem with extended primaries. The more bad things said about a candidate, the more trouble. For those of you who are worried about Obama's chances, there have been 13 presidential elections in the last century where a first-term incumbent's been on the ballot. 9 wins for the incumbent, 4 losses.
Okay, go ahead.
First of all, thank you all for your comments for us. Given the anger, which you all suggest is because of the non-responsiveness of government and a fear that the middle class and our ability to achieve the middle class or our children's, and hence a non-responsive to middle class values, and again an anger at the power of the robber barons or whoever those power brokers are, isn't at the heart of this election reform. That is, in a country where it will cost $1 billion to run for president or some awesome number, and where the contributions of individuals like us pale by comparison to the huge contributions from the power elite, all those people that they're angry at. Isn't the real, I ask you for your thoughts about election reform is at the heart of both of these movements?
Well, certainly it's an ongoing issue in America, and there's certainly a lot of research that shows the American public does not like the fact that large corporations give large amounts of money and that there's large amounts of money in politics. Even the Supreme Court was concerned about that, which is one of the reasons why it's gone along with various forms of campaign reform. The problem is where do you go, especially with Citizens United now saying that the freedom of speech is absolute. It's very hard to know how you could regulate the situation.
Okay, time for one more question. How about this lady here in the blue shirt?
Can I yell?
No,
No,
we
no.
want you on tape.
Microphone's coming.
If the next election with the primary problem will be the economy, what are the Tea Party people for? They don't want any government spending, so do they have an answer?
I think it'd be more tax cuts. It would be deficit reduction. It'd be getting rid of regulations.
Free trade, anti-free trade for more
And,
jobs at home.
Yep.
and increase it, as of this week, it would be a return to yesterday, as it were, energy policy.
Okay, all right. I think we might be out of time.
2 minutes if you want to do another one.
Okay. One more? Okay, great. How about you?
I feel disenfranchised. I don't like either party. I feel that they are both more interested in being reelected than they are in serving the country. And I think most people on both sides. And so I would love to have a third party that was moderate or was reasonable, that would get something done. And it seems to me that both, the extremes feel that way too, but they don't want to compromise. That's all I have to say.
Can I ask you something? Are you troubled by the history of third parties which tend to throw the elections to one or the other? In other words, is the contradiction inherent in what you're saying? Does that weigh on you?
My brother ran as a libertarian against Barbara Boxer in this last election. Mm-hmm. He got no response from the media. Mm-hmm. He got no publicity. Mm-hmm. He would have been a wonderful candidate. Mm-hmm. He was centrist. He's a retired judge. He had great ideas on what we could do to solve some of our problems. And so, yes, I'm not troubled by the third party. I'm troubled by their ability to be recognized and get their message across.
Yeah.
Peter, do you want to come up? Okay. Do you want to come up, Peter?
Okay, yes. Well, we want to thank everybody for attending here, and we definitely want to thank our panel. It's So again, thank you very much. There's information on the center and on how you can continue to get information about the class. Again, thank you.
Thank you.